It was a day just like any other. And all throughout the palace, things were quiet. Until suddenly, half of it is blown away and completely destroyed, as somebody is sent flying further and further into the distance. And they somewhat struggle to get onto their feet. Now, this person was the Grand Priest, as we do have one man who comes walking out of the rubble, and who actually does show who he is, Izuku Midoriya, and his brand new transformation. Now, with that, how exactly did he get here? Now, let us start somewhere around the beginning of his journey. Izuku Midoriya, after 100 years of the tournament, he was still struggling to cope, and he found things to be very hard. No matter what form of training he did, he always went back to that last moment. His supposed death, where he should have died. And he still does struggle with it. And it just keeps getting him angrier and angrier. As Vados did actually intervene, asking Midoriya if he would like to train or spar, to take his mind off of these events. And Midoriya is shouting for her to leave him alone. As Midoriya began to train by himself, using some of his newfound angelic abilities, and test driving them. Now, Midoriya began to create a multitude of different things, along with actually showing off grand power. Now, with that being said, Midoriya would spend the next 20,000 years to possibly 100,000 years training and training, trying to get stronger in his base form, and simply get to a level high enough for what could be days upon end, or possibly even weeks, even years. Midoriya just began to keep training, and things began to get blurred together. Midoriya just kept going. Whenever he dropped to the ground exhausted, or basically tired enough to where he could die, he would get back up somewhere around a few hours later, possibly days or weeks. Midoriya cannot tell how time passes here. And this does somewhat drive his mortal mind, or human mind, insane. He's not supposed to be alive for this long. And he's not even supposed to be this way. Born human, turned Saiyan, turned God, then turned angelic being. Midoriya can feel changes happening within his body. And he's driven to an absolute breaking point. Now, Midoriya, after being driven insane, would basically carry out some of the work the Grand Priest does have. Midoriya doing it joyfully. The Grand Priest creating universes, and if he does not like the results, or where they would one day be, Midoriya would be in charge of taking care of them, and making sure that nothing survives. Now, Midoriya would play his role, and as he's losing his mind further and further down the rabbit hole, we do cut somewhere around 5,000 years later, where Midoriya is still intensely training. Or training quote unquote. Him blasting away at and destroying countless planets inside this brand new universe. The Grand Priest watching on as Midoriya is nothing more than a feral dog too sick on anything he does not like. And the Grand Priest did actually want to intervene, try and get Midoriya to calm down, and to, most likely, seek out some sort of counseling or way to treat his bizarre nature. Now, we do have Midoriya whenever he does get back to the palace, him going to leave, before continuing on his own training in a very unknown region or place outside of existence. Well, the world of Void. Midoriya just bringing his hands up and throwing large blast in any which direction, throwing it at planets that he creates. And if he wants to, just throwing his hands up and blasting away at beams. Midoriya watching these pretty fireworks. Now, we do actually have Vados, who does go to intervene. Now, whenever she did actually arrive at the world of Void, she began to talk with Midoriya, ask him if he was alright. Midoriya turned to look at her with a sadistic grin on his face, without saying a single word. And she did try and explain to Midoriya about the way the world is now, or the way everything is, instructing Midoriya that he should just calm down, and let her help him. She can show him ways to deal with his problems, along with her and the other angels. He can possibly seek out counseling and a guiding hand from her brother Whis and the other angels. Midoriya turning around and asking Vados about the other 6 universes the Grand Priest destroyed. You heard me. The other 6, besides the 12 that did exist. Oh, what about them? They had angels, did they not? Ah, I see. Yes, they formerly did. And what happened to them? Well, that's a complex question. I do not know the answer to. So you're saying you don't know what happened to your brothers or sisters? No. Not even the Grand Priest would. Zeno most likely would have erased them. Or dealt with them, I am unsure. So you turn your back on your own family. Pitiful. Her actually grabbing Midoriya and stating that now she is here to help. He should understand. She used to be his teacher. And Midoriya actually does grab her by her hand and throw her over his shoulder, smashing her down onto the ground as he actually does tell her that she's no longer his teacher. And that he's gone beyond even her now, hasn't he? Her shouting that that is not true, as she means to power up. Now, Midoriya and her do eventually duke it out and fight. These two having an intense battle within the world of the Void. And Midoriya is actually going at Super Saiyan Blue levels. Or, let's just say, Blue Evolution. Now, Midoriya is throwing away immense power, sending all these flying at her, as he actually does bring his hand up for a very powerful blast, immediately switching over to Ultra Instinct, and using the Kai Kai technique. Vados being caught off guard, as Midoriya appears instantly behind her, and he does actually throw out his left hand, along with moving his right hand. And as soon as he does actually throw out his left, Vados dodged, and Midoriya fired immediately. Now, Vados dodged the attack Midoriya threw. At the same time, he did launch another attack to counter her dodge. And Vados, she did not predict that. Midoriya sending an immense amount of power flying directly into her back, and knocking her forwards. Midoriya explaining that he's now gone beyond her, and that there's nothing she can do against him. Midoriya walking forwards, and bringing his hand out to charge up Hakai energy. Him laughing sadistically and asking exactly what does she think this would do to an angel. He is curious to find out. Him being struck in the back of the neck by a multitude of hands. As we do actually have 7 angels with all their fingers and hands outstretched to the back of Midoriya's neck. Him falling forwards. And passing out. Now, the Grand Priest then does actually step forwards, and asking Vados if she is alright. Her giving a small explanation. She is, but Midoriya is not in his right mental capacity, or mental facilities, and that he needs to be trained again, or at least seek help. The Grand Priest can barely understand anything she's really saying. Not really sure what Midoriya could be going through. Still dealing with the loss of those people from the Tournament of Power. Now, with that being said, let us cut to around another 2,000 to 3,000 years, with Midoriya sitting down in what could be described as a green field, and him there in Ultra Instinct. Now, along with that, Midoriya, he is visualizing something, as he does actually go to bring his hand up. As soon as he does, ki begins to flow from his hands, and constructs are made. Now, as soon as this does happen, we do have what could be described as Midoriya's earlier memories. Midoriya, he has created Momo out of his own ki. And then we actually have Wakashi. As a baby, Midoriya created him again. And Midoriya actually does go to open his eyes. And he does actually somewhat smile, bringing his hand up and running it across this creation's face, asking if she does remember who he is. Her simply just giving a smile, before stating that she remembers him. She always will. She is one of the only ones that they will never forget. And the creation then does actually look off into the distance, and say that they are waiting for her. She can't just leave them. Before picking up the construct baby, and telling Midoriya that he does have a lot to go through on his journey, and that they will be back. However, Midoriya does remember the promise that he did make to them, correct? The one that he did make to himself? Midoriya actually having tears run down his face, as he does nod. Her then actually walking away, telling Midoriya to fulfill it, and do it. If he does not keep his promise, then they will never return. Now, as the construct is walking away, they disappear and vanish. Midoriya then actually opening his eyes for real, as he gets up off of the cold white floor, and does actually begin to power up, creating constructs to use out of his ki, and furthering his mastery of ki control. Now, he also does continue his intense training, and a few ideas and techniques that he did actually want to achieve. Now, let us cut around the full time later. After this 100,000 years have passed, we do currently have Midoriya, who is actually training against Vados, him actually dodging away at her and evading her quite well, as he is using Ultra Instinct. And he does actually go to throw out his hand to attack, hitting Vados in the gut and sending her flying away, as another angel does come flying in and go to attack Midoriya. Now, as soon as this does happen, Midoriya actually does dodge away at them, before throwing his leg behind him and kicking another angel, as many of them keep flying towards him and attacking him, and trying to train against Midoriya. Now, at some point in the past, it became quite apparent. Midoriya somehow surpassed them all, and they actually did want to learn more about their own powers. If a mortal can become an angel, then what would happen if they continued training and learning? Unfortunately, the Grand Priest became far too busy, and Midoriya did assume the role as the teacher. Now, Midoriya, he actually does defeat all of the angels before actually bringing his hands up and powering down, going back to his regular base form. Now then, he does actually instruct them all that they actually did very well, and that they got him, well, fired up for an actual fight. Now, they all do go on stating that that's not possible anymore. Midoriya does need to hold back in order to fight properly. And even then, he is just far too powerful. Now, with that being said, Midoriya does actually walk away, his attitude quickly changing and actually seeming a bit more serious in tone. Midoriya just thinking that he's doing very well. In fact, at the current rate he is going, he believes he might be able to kill the Omni King, or take down the Grand Priest. Him actually understanding a few things. Number 1. The Grand Priest is in the top 5 strongest in the multiverse. However, so is Midoriya now. Then there is the creator of the Dragon Balls, or the Super Dragon Balls, the Namekian God. That man must have some sort of power. Midoriya has never met Zalama as he believes he is called, but he is rumored and notorious. He's never stepped foot within this castle as far as he's existed. Now, with that being said, there is also the Grand Priest and Zeno's guards. Midoriya believes that currently right now, the list goes Zeno, Grand Priest, or Zeno, Zalama, Grand Priest, the guards, then him. However, Midoriya is also quite curious. With his many costume changes, as we'll call them, he believes that there might be a chance for him to get a sneak attack and fight the Grand Priest, or at least take him down before he understands what is going on. Now, Midoriya does actually begin to power up, him jumping into Super Saiyan and beginning to walk around. Now, along with that, he actually has begun to kai around the palace, looking for the Grand Priest. Eventually, he does actually find him, working on and trying to construct certain things for a universe. As he holds up a small little planet in the air and is carefully designing it, wondering if Grand Zeno would be able to make this possible, and this possible, and even put these type of life forms on the planet, just to see if they would have any success. Now, that being said, Midoriya actually does power up further, and go into Ultra Instinct. Now, as that does happen, Midoriya actually does sock the Grand Priest across the face, as fast as he could, using the mixture of the Kai and his own power. This catching the Grand Priest completely off guard, as he gets sent flying out of the side of Zeno's palace. And Midoriya does actually step out. Now, the Grand Priest is very confused, as he does turn his head and see Midoriya, who is not only using Ultra Instinct, but has Super Saiyan stacked on top of that. Now, he is very surprised about this, and is wondering exactly what is going on, asking Midoriya about his insubordinates, and as to why he laid his hands on him. Midoriya simply just stating that it is actually a few things, Grand Priest, as it has actually dropped out of this weird form. Stepping forwards in his base, him telling the Grand Priest that he's played his games long enough. He has been driven insane, sane, and further beyond that. He's let him have his little outburst and what he believes to be called episodes. And he does claim to be a good man and a good person, and that mortals, if they show anything that isn't these qualities, they must be purged and destroyed. However, him bringing up his finger and pointing at the Grand Priest, saying that he let 6 of his own children die before he would have said a thing to Zeno about there being a problem. Now, he does further insult the Grand Priest, as he does actually power up. Now, Midoriya does actually tell the Grand Priest that he's very curious to see his power, and that he was told never to challenge him. However, he's finally had enough. He's been holding back the urge to sock him across the face like that every single day, every single year, decade, century, millennia. And that he would have done that far sooner if he could have. Now, the Grand Priest is actually shaking off this punch, as he does actually stand up to his feet. And he does actually Kai directly in front of Midoriya. Midoriya throwing his hands up and going for an attack. The Grand Priest catching with one finger, before beginning to ask Midoriya exactly what does he believe that he accomplished. Now, he will simply just have Zeno wipe his memories and, most likely, destroy him. If he does this one more time, him actually going to flick Midoriya across the nose. Now, Midoriya quickly jumps into Super Saiyan Blue, and Kai's behind the Grand Priest, his power taking a very large leap. Now, after that does happen, the Grand Priest does actually turn around and see Midoriya. Midoriya telling the Grand Priest that if he's going to be wiped or killed, then he would at least like a good fight, just like a proper Saiyan would. And the Grand Priest is actually somewhat, well, giving him Midoriya's last request, or his final request, as he does actually bring up one of his hands, and tell Midoriya that that is at least something that he will provide. Now, Midoriya then does actually rush forwards and go on the offensive, fighting against the Grand Priest, as the Grand Priest does actually tell Midoriya that this is a very impressive power, blocking away at all his punches, and trying to punch the Midoriya's defense. No. He does actually tell Midoriya that this is very impressive, and that he's stronger than every other angel so far. However, he is still far, far behind everybody else. Now, Midoriya does actually continue, and he's blown away by an attack at 20% of the Grand Priest's actual power. Now, as soon as Midoriya is actually blown away, he's sent flying, and is actually smashed into the ground. As soon as that does actually happen, he begins to heal his body with the healing technique, him no longer needing to focus it into his hands and place it somewhere, as he does actually stand up back onto his feet, and suck in a deep breath for air. Now, the Grand Priest has actually asked Midoriya if he's had enough of that. Midoriya is stating that no, he has not, and that he's going to try something that he's been working on. He's going to give him everything he has. Now, he actually has begun to power up, and the Grand Priest has actually watched this. Midoriya jumping into Super Saiyan Blue Evolution 2. The art is by Ser C. I have no idea how to pronounce this name. Anyways, now, Midoriya does jump into this form, and surprise the Grand Priest, as Midoriya does actually smile for a second. And he does actually continue, powering up further and further. Now, this next form is provided by this person. They created it, and I do actually enjoy its design. Super Saiyan Blue Evolution 4. Now, Midoriya does actually combine the Ikari mode and his legendary Super Saiyan form into these two, well, little things. Now, Midoriya is putting in a whole lot of things into his own power, and exerting his body quite harshly. Now, the Grand Priest has actually watched this, and is shocked, watching Midoriya step forwards, as a very large and bulking man. And Midoriya does actually bring up his arms, and remark on how he's done it. His power feels like it's overflowing, and that he's virtually limitless, beginning to laugh and smile, as he rushes towards the Grand Priest, and goes for an attack. Now, the Grand Priest is actually caught off guard by Midoriya's newfound speed, as he does actually bring up his hand and go to freeze time around them. As soon as he did actually do that, he found that Midoriya, who was in front of him, actually did begin to disappear. And he actually did look around, and see Midoriya all around him, being quite surprised. An after image, him bring up his left hand and going to attack it. Now, as soon as he did actually do that, he found that this after image poofs, before cracks do begin to be heard. And Midoriya, he's able to punch through time, and blitz the Grand Priest, socking him once more across his face, before bring up his hands and saying devastation, as the energy in his palm begins to spark and grow in size, before the beam Midoriya sends flying out, barely the size of the palm of his hand, before blasting away and actually causing Midoriya's leg and arm to react like a shotgun to this attack. Now, as soon as it does actually happen, the Grand Priest does actually get back up and go to smack the blast away. Doing so as Midoriya did actually blitz him once more, using Kai Kai and being able to try and smash his leg directly into the Grand Priest's back. The Grand Priest dodging this attack and going to go against Midoriya, who does actually do something quite similar, being able to evade an attack from the Grand Priest. Now, many of the angels are actually watching the current battle, along with Zeno, being confused as to what is going on, wondering why that angel and the Grand Priest are playing like the old tournament, and him actually finding this to be quite entertaining, clapping his hands and watching. Now, with that being said, Midoriya does actually keep going against the Grand Priest, his power growing more and more beyond their fight. And the Grand Priest, he does actually go to knock Midoriya towards the ground. And he does actually blast him with the back of his hand at around 30% of his power. Now, Midoriya is sent flying away as he does actually smash back down into the ground. However, he does not drop out of his base form. And the Grand Priest does actually lament on how Midoriya was quite impressive, as he does actually bring his hand up as he does feel something wet on his forehead. And he does actually wipe away what could be considered a drop of blood. Now, Midoriya does actually raise his head up and sit up the top part of his torso, looking at the Grand Priest, as he just begins to smile. Now, he does actually stand back up onto his feet and begin to take focus. The Grand Priest watching Midoriya use Mastered Ultra Instinct in this brand new form. Now, Super Saiyan 4 MS created this image, which the Grand Priest is currently looking at. Now, Midoriya does actually rush the Grand Priest once again, and the Grand Priest did not even have time to blink. In less than a nanosecond, Midoriya was in front of him, and he did actually throw up his hand to attack, and shock the Grand Priest. The Grand Priest actually being hit in his stomach, as he does actually get sent flying away and hit into the ground. Midoriya doing this once more, him arriving directly in front of the Grand Priest and going to attack. Now, the Grand Priest does actually go defensively and offensively, as he does continue to fight against Midoriya, bringing his power up to around 70%, and find this to be quite amusing. Now, Midoriya can tell by the way the Grand Priest is fighting, he's never fought before in his life. He can train and do all this and all that. However, Midoriya does hold the edge over here, as he does actually use perfect ki control, and smash the Grand Priest across the face, and send a powerful hit to his jaw. His final thought being that he's going to win this. Now, as he does actually send the Grand Priest flying away, the Grand Priest does actually go into a spin, stopping in the air as he actually just bring his hands up and create a planet, or a brand new universe before tossing it at Midoriya. Now, Midoriya with the back of his hand just swats the universe away, and it's obliterated. The Grand Priest watching that, yelling at Midoriya that he could have dodged that and saved it if he wanted to. Maybe I could have, but what's the point? If I can't be your perfect little creation, you're just going to destroy it. Besides, they're all just puppets. Midoriya brings his hands up, as wires do begin to run out from his fingers. Midoriya just bringing his hands up and watching these strings dance, talking about how puppets have strings. And Midoriya, him throwing his hands outwards to slash away at the Grand Priest. These wires elongating and running outwards. The Grand Priest going to dodge. However, he gets quickly cut on his legs and arms. And Midoriya just shouts that he doesn't have any strings left on him. The Grand Priest using the Kai Kai technique, similar to what Midoriya did, copying him exactly. Midoriya bringing up his arm and throwing it over to protect the back of his head, catching the Grand Priest's leg, as he does actually pull him over his shoulder, and he does, with the back of his right elbow, smash him directly upwards into his ribcage, before grabbing the Grand Priest by his throat with his left hand. Now, the Grand Priest, he's actually finding some sort of enjoyment throughout this battle. He's never been pushed like this physically. What is going on? Him having a billion thoughts run throughout his mind. Now, Midoriya does actually continue stating that the Grand Priest, he needs to go all out if he wants to kill him, or destroy him. Besides, he's as green as a child, learning how to throw a punch. Midoriya is shouting that you also do it like this, cocking back his hand and punching him directly in his face. Now, as it does actually happen, the Grand Priest does begin to power up, and Midoriya does actually see an aura finally form around the man, as Midoriya does actually begin to power up himself. And he talks about how these forms he has are quite intriguing. He's never thought to use the lesser forms before and mix them together, especially since he does actually have Rose and the evolutions beyond 4. Now, with that being said, Midoriya, he actually does begin to power up intensely, as he does wonder, should he really go all out? Well, let's oblige. Midoriya is shouting Kaioken, as his white aura does actually spark up with a bit of red in it now, along with his blue aura, or his deep blue aura, and fierce yellow, beginning to make appearances. Now, the Grand Priest is still quite intrigued, rushing forwards at 100%, as Midoriya does actually do the same, and these two, their punch does collide. Now, the force behind both their punches was enough to blow away this portion of reality, and throw them into the next. Now, with that, they both did actually begin to throw punches back and forth, as with every punch that they collide, they begin to throw themselves through realities, and shake the very foundations of those universes. Now, the reality is that with every punch they cause, not only are they entering those realities, but they're destroying the previous. The very force behind their punches is too much for existence to try and hold. So it is making sacrifices in order to keep itself together. Now, the Supreme Kai of Time does actually take notice to this battle. With all the free, time on their hands, ironically, nothing has really been going on. So they have been trying to monitor alternative universes, or timelines that somewhat do still exist. The stragglers of the bunch. Now, these timelines begin to be disappearing, and they did actually look for the source, finding Izuku Midoriya and the Grand Priest currently in space, and their power going back against each other. Midoriya and the Grand Priest both having their arms locked together, as they're both trying to fly in different directions. And Midoriya does actually throw the Grand Priest through a solar system. The Grand Priest smashing through that solar system's sun and different planets. As he does actually go flying towards Midoriya, and sock him directly in the gut, wrapping his arms around Midoriya and beginning to fly him through multiple planets, and knocking him into a planet's sun. Now, Midoriya was thrown into a giant red sun, and it exploded on top of these two. Midoriya throwing his hands above his head and smashing them down on the Grand Priest's back, as he does actually shout Kaioken times 10, bringing his hand up or his knee up and kicking the Grand Priest in the face once more. And the two are sent through to another timeline. Now, with this, the battle continues to ramp up in intensity. And Cronoa, I believe the Supreme Kai of Time's name is called, does actually begin to look at all of this, and find it to be quite intriguing. Exactly what is happening? This does not make any sense. Now, along with that, Zeno is actually watching this fight, and wondering exactly what will happen. What is the outcome? Him actually laughing and smiling, while Zeno's guards are both panicking a lot. Now, they know that if the Grand Priest is to fall or die, then they would be the last line of defense. However, they are not as strong as him. They will be slaughtered against this threat. Now, with that being said, Midoriya and the Grand Priest do actually collide once more. This time, both their knees being the drawing force behind it all. As soon as their right knees did collide, they both did actually try and throw up multiple punches. The Grand Priest actually bring up his hand and blocking Midoriya's right hook, as Midoriya then actually did throw an immediate left, still being able to smash the Grand Priest in the jaw. And the Grand Priest did actually smile about that. And Midoriya smiled back, the two beginning a dialogue. Now, as these two are both going back and forth with intense blows, both being blocked and countered at the same time, they actually do begin a small conversation. The Grand Priest talking about how Midoriya is very remarkable. He knew that his potential was great, but this is far beyond his predictions. And Midoriya did actually get a bit angry, shouting about what does that mean. The Grand Priest continuing on to state, he looked into Midoriya's future, and he saw what he would one day become. Now, he does actually ask Midoriya to use his true power, and to go all out, to his absolute physical limit. The Grand Priest continuing to power up more, as Midoriya does actually shout Kaioken times 1000. And the two actually did have their aura spark and spew all around this universe. Now, as soon as that did actually happen, Midoriya brought his hands up, and so did the Grand Priest, and the two did collide. And Cronoa was watching this, as the scroll of time she's looking at immediately explodes into multiple shards, and so does many others along the shelves. Now, she does actually have to throw herself underneath the table at all these shards being thrown around, and it's quite destructive to say the least. Now, as soon as that does actually happen, Midoriya does actually kick the Grand Priest across the face, hard, as the two do find themselves back in Zeno's palace, or Zeno's realm. Now, this was quite interesting. The Grand Priest laying out on the ground, battle-torn and bleeding, as he's heavily panting. And there stands Izuku Midoriya, as he does actually begin to walk forwards. And he begins to charge up a small white little ball of energy. Now, Midoriya does tell the Grand Priest that was quite exciting. He even had to force himself up to 10,000. However, he believes that that will be all. I see. So you are to replace me. I accept defeat. Replace you? What are you talking about? The battle. For the Universal Tournament. Long ago. I changed the results. Change the... Start explaining. Your universe originally won. I rigged it. I knew the selfish man's wish. However, I knew that if your universe won, you would not become me. You would not become my replacement. You bastard. So all of this, everything you've put me through, it was all to replace you? Yes. I see now. I accept it. The Grand Priest bowing to Midoriya. As Midoriya, who does actually still have this attack charging in his hand, does actually have one thing happen. A halo begins to form around his neck. And Midoriya does actually look down to see this. Him quite surprised. As it begins to slowly move upwards. And form behind Midoriya's head. Now, Midoriya does begin to laugh. The Grand Priest is quite surprised. Midoriya quickly powering up to 100,000 times Kaioken. And Midoriya, his body is physically tearing itself apart. However, Midoriya is using the healing technique to keep himself together. His ki is flowing and endless at this point. So, he doesn't even have any drawbacks anymore. He's quite literally become a perfect killing machine and warrior. As he brings his hands up to the Grand Priest's face, and this little white ball of energy is still charging, not even moving in size. Midoriya telling the Grand Priest his actual plan. He is going to take Zeno's place, and there is nothing he can do to stop him. The Grand Priest, his eyes widening on in horror, realizing what is about to happen. Midoriya shouting one single thing. White Dwarf. As the power behind Midoriya's small little attack, it throws itself outwards. And it does land on the Grand Priest. The moment it hits the Grand Priest's forehead, the Grand Priest is engulfed in this power. Now, this attack is basically an enhanced version of the Spirit Bomb, and it's gone through many trials and errors. However, well, throw in immense power and Hakai energy, and you got one hell of an attack. Now, the Grand Priest is basically destroyed and completely annihilated by this power. Midoriya then using the Kai, appearing right in front of Zeno's guards. And both of them do look on at Midoriya, as he does actually begin to step forwards, walking in their direction. Now, they do actually go to attack Midoriya, and go to bring up their weapons to defend Zeno. Midoriya, in less than a nanosecond, appearing directly behind these two, as both of them fade from existence. Now, he does continue walking forwards. And there sits Zeno, asking Midoriya if he's going to play with him. No, Zeno, I'm not. In fact, I'm here for something else. Now, Midoriya then actually does walk over to him and grab him by his hands, pulling him up into the air. And Zeno is still looking confused, like a fish out of water. And Midoriya does actually remark on how he knew something was off. Zeno isn't truly Zeno. He is nothing more than the construct of creation. Now, he remarks on how the Grand Priest is really Zeno, and how he split up himself into different pieces. The guards, the angels, everything, isn't he correct? This construct of Zeno, looking quite confused, and continuing to ask more questions. As Midoriya does tell him to stop asking questions. As he grabs Zeno with both hands, and begins the process of absorbing his power. Now, the angels, they simply just watch on, as Zeno disappears from Midoriya's hands, and Midoriya does actually bring his hands together, as his hair does continue to glow, and Midoriya, his clothing changes. Now, Midoriya then actually does turn around, and the angels do go on the defensive. All of them except for Vados, as she simply just drops down onto her knee, ready to welcome the new Zeno. All of them looking on in confusion. And Midoriya tells them all to kneel before him. Kneel before Zeno or be destroyed. Now, Midoriya, he begins to float up into the air. And all of them do watch. Before I do continue, there is the watermark. There is no name except for that watermark on this beautiful piece of artwork. Now, Midoriya brings up his left hand, and he throws it outwards towards all of them, the ones who did not kneel being destroyed and obliterated. And Midoriya asking them if they would all like to understand the situation before snapping his fingers, the angels reappearing. And this is whenever everyone does actually begin to kneel. Midoriya beginning a bit of instructions. Did they all like the way things were before the Grand Priest tricked the universes to be destroyed? A lot of them commenting certain things. Some of them did not mind their position. Some of them did mind it. And others simply did not really care for it, stating that they had certain opinions. Midoriya explaining that that is all good. Now, he is going to give them a new set of orders, as he does bring his hands up, and begin to restore the universes. Now, the 12 universes that were destroyed, they reappear instantly, and Midoriya peeks into the 6 universes that were destroyed, bringing them back. Now, he does continue on explaining that they are now free to go. This is surprising a lot of them, as Midoriya does say that they can all leave now. Do whatever they wish. They are no longer bound by the laws of angels. He is to rewrite them, as he himself does disappear. Now, all of the angels do actually have their staffs disappear, and their halos begin to flicker and break. Now, they all do feel their newfound freedom, and many of them do actually begin to rejoice, somewhat stating that this is perfect, this is different. Many of them still being conflicted, wishing to act as, well, an angel. Now, Vados herself does actually use the Kai Kai technique, and jump back into the newly reformed Universe 7, as everyone suddenly reappears, back at Midoriya's house, and they're all confused. They're all crowded around a table, and they all do look like fishes out of water. Before they remember the tournament, all of them jumping up and shouting that they're all going to be erased by Zeno, as Midoriya does actually walk into the room, and explain that that is not the case anymore. Them turning to see Midoriya, and all being quite shocked by this new development. Now, Midoriya begins a quick and brief explanation that they are back. He made a promise to them all, and he's finally delivered. Now, he does actually immediately run over to his family, and for the first time in a very long time, he feels them, he hears them, he sees them, and he does actually begin to shed tears. Midoriya explained that they were the only thing that kept him going, and he drove himself to hell and back, a hell of his own design, just in order to have any attempt to fight. They gave him strength in his moment of need, and they kept him anchored to everything. Now, Bakugo actually does begin to think that this Midoriya can't actually be Midoriya. Midoriya turning and looking at Bakugo, asking Bakugo exactly what does he think about everything. He knows what he's thinking right now. He is now Zeno himself. Now, he does also bring up his hand, and he turns back the clock, so to say, as, out of thin air, purple pieces of energy begin to reform and take shape. Now, everyone who is not Wakashi, Hope, Etsa, or Olivia does actually get quite shocked at the two people who do appear right next to Midoriya, Hasashi and Inko, as they are both holding nothing in their arms, quite confused, as they both do look around. Where are we? Hey Mom. Hey Dad. Now, Wakashi actually does somewhat spit out the water he just picked up and shout Grandma and Grandpa, this surprising everyone else in the room. Now, this actually does confuse them whenever they do look over and see the grown adults in the room, the four who called them Grandma and Grandpa, along with, well, Hope from the future. And they're quite confused. Them all taking a seat and getting a rundown. Now then, with that being said, Midoriya has become the god of everything. He's made a promise and paid it back in full, bringing back a dead universe, the dead multiverse, and even doing something beyond his wildest imagination, bringing back people with no soul. He brought his mother and father back to the land of the living, and they were astonished to learn about the Emperor's defeat, Beerus' defeat, his awakening. And then there is Vados who does actually pop into the room, Midoriya turning and asking her exactly what is she doing here. Isn't she going to continue on with her duties? And she does actually explain, as her halo finally does disappear. And her hair does actually begin to fade into a different color, along with her skin somewhat beginning to change, as she does actually bring her hands up. And she does actually revert to a different form, a form before her angel's blessing, and her eventual change, stating that she wishes to be a part of his family. Now, Midoriya does actually step forwards, and he does actually look up towards Vados, telling her that she has always been family. Her quickly pulling him into a hug, and beginning to shed a bit of tears. Midoriya talking about how she's always been there for him, and at times he did actually see her as a mother after Hisashi and Inko did die. However, he never wanted to say it himself. He couldn't bring himself to admit it, that in his heart he saw her as a member of the family. Now, with that being said, let us cut to around a year later. Back in Beerus' planet, Bakugo and Kirishima are still training intensely and going to fight, as Midoriya does actually step out from nowhere and power down to his base form and bring his hands up, asking these two if they would like to fight against him. And both of them actually do power up themselves. Now, they both power up to a form that does actually intrigue Midoriya. They seem to have discovered Super Saiyan Blue evolution too. Midoriya deciding to keep the fact that he knows about that hidden, as they do actually rush towards him. Now, the fight begins. And I believe that we can leave this what if off of here. Now then, this has been an adventure, everybody. Now, Midoriya's ascension. A boy with a power level of 150, I believe I said in the beginning of the series, becoming the Omni King of the multiverse, and shattering the expectations of the previous gods. Midoriya's journey is finally at an end. Now, I do hope you guys enjoyed this series, because I certainly did.